Let me guess. You're 19, maybe 20, and everyone around you seems to be moving. They have a direction, a course, a city they're going to, a thing they're building, and you're sitting there with a phone in your hand and this quiet, specific feeling that you missed something. Not a class, not a lesson, something deeper. Like everyone got a map and yours never arrived. That feeling isn't confusion, that's clarity. That's you correctly sensing that the world you were handed doesn't actually have a place reserved for you in it. Nobody built a seat at the table with your name on it. And the advice you've been getting: study hard, be patient, work for someone who already made it. That advice was never designed to make you powerful. It was designed to make you useful to someone else's power. Machiavelli understood this, not as philosophy, as lived reality. He watched young men in 15th century Florence destroy their futures, not because they were stupid or lazy, but because they moved without reading the terrain first. He wrote in his private letters that the most dangerous thing a young man can do is respond to pressure with speed, panic dressed as ambition, motion mistaken for progress. What you're about to hear isn't motivation. Machiavelli had no interest in motivating people. He was interested in equipping them. There is a difference. Motivation fades by morning. What he left behind cuts permanently. Before we get into the laws themselves, there is one man worth understanding first. Not Machiavelli, someone who lived the exact situation you're in right now. Cosimo de' Medici, Florence, 1408, 19 years old. No title, no formal power. His father Giovanni was still alive, still in control of the family bank, still the one everyone came to. Cosimo was, by every external measure, irrelevant. A rich kid with no authority and no obvious path to get any. Most young men in that position did one of two things. They performed, threw parties, made noise, attached themselves to powerful men publicly, and hoped someone noticed. Or they waited, assumed that time would eventually hand them what they deserved. Cosimo did neither. He spent those years doing something so quiet nobody wrote about it until much later. He mapped who actually held influence in Florence versus who merely appeared to. Which families were in debt to which men in the room controlled decisions versus which ones just spoke loudly in meetings. He never announced his observations. He never revealed his conclusions. He simply watched and recorded, inside his own mind, the real architecture of power in the city he intended to eventually run. By the time circumstances shifted and power became available, Cosimo already knew exactly where to place himself. He didn't scramble, he stepped. Because he had spent years learning the ground before he ever needed to walk on it. There is something specific worth naming here. Cosimo wasn't patient in the passive sense. He wasn't sitting in a room waiting for his turn. He was active, intensely, privately active, in a way that produced no visible output for years. That invisibility was intentional. The moment you let people see what you're building before it's built, they begin responding to the idea of it rather than the reality. And ideas without results are just targets. Cosimo never gave anyone a target until he was already holding the territory. That is the model. Not hustle, not patience. Intelligent, silent preparation before the moment arrives. Now, the laws. Law 1, the blank map advantage. Every person who will try to advise you in the next 5 years will treat your lack of direction as a problem to be solved immediately. Get a degree. Learn a trade. Pick something. The urgency in their voice is real, but it belongs to them, not to you. It is their discomfort with your openness, not an accurate reading of your situation. Machiavelli was precise about this. He wrote that the man who commits to a path before he understands the terrain will spend years correcting a mistake he made in an afternoon. Having no plan at 19 is not a deficit. It is the only age in your life where starting from zero is actually a strategic position. The 28-year-old locked into a career he chose at 18 out of panic cannot pivot without cost. You can. That flexibility is not nothing. It is a weapon. The men who treat it like a wound are the ones who waste it. Think about what committing too early actually costs. You pick a field under pressure, spend 2 to 3 years building skills and identity around it, accumulate social proof inside it, and then discover it doesn't fit who you actually are or where money actually moves. Now leaving costs you more than the years. It costs you the story you've been telling people, the expectations you've built in others, the sunk cost that makes every rational reason to pivot feel like failure. That trap is what premature commitment builds, and it is almost impossible to see from inside it. The blank map means you can draw the route yourself. Most people never get that option. They had it at your age, and someone taught them out of it. Law 2. The terrain before the move. Machiavelli's first principle for any military campaign, any political move, any acquisition of new territory: understand the ground before you step on it. Study it from a distance first, then closer, then walk it before you run it. Most 19-year-olds skip this entirely. They hear about an opportunity, an industry, a city that seems to be where things are happening, and they move on feeling. That's not courage. That's impatience wearing courage's clothes. Reading the terrain means knowing the actual rules of the game before you play, not the official rules. Not what the website says, the real ones. How does money actually move in this industry? Who has been doing it for 10 years, and what does their life actually look like? Not their public version, the real version. What do the people at the bottom of this field have in common, and what separates the rare ones who actually climbed? Here is something most people don't consider. Every industry has a public narrative about how success happens inside it, and then a private reality that practitioners rarely discuss openly. The public narrative exists to attract labor. The private reality is what people who've been in it for a decade know and quietly keep to themselves. Your job, before you commit to anything, is to find 2 or 3 people deep enough in that world to have seen behind the narrative, and to ask them questions specific enough that they can't give you the brochure answer. Most people never reach this layer because they ask vague questions and accept vague answers. The information exists. You have to earn access to it through the quality of your curiosity. You do not need to be in the room to observe the room. You need to pay the kind of attention that most young men are too impatient to pay. The ones who do this for 6 months before they commit to anything make better decisions in a week than the ones who've been moving for 3 years without looking. Law 3. Who holds the keys? In every city, every industry, every organization, there are never more than 3 people who actually control access to what you want. Not the person with the biggest title. Not the loudest one in the room. 3 people, usually quiet, usually not obviously positioned, who decide who gets in and who doesn't. Machiavelli spent his entire career studying this exact dynamic in Florentine politics. He watched men spend years building relationships with the visible power, the duke, the magistrate, the publicly recognized authority, while completely ignoring the advisor behind him, the secretary who controlled his schedule, the merchant who held his debt. Visible power is almost never where access actually lives. It is the face of power. The mechanism sits somewhere quieter. This is just as true today. In any company, there is the official hierarchy, and then there is the real one. The person who controls information flow, who the decision maker actually listens to, who can make a process fast or slow based on how they feel about you. These people are almost never the ones with the impressive title. Finding them requires observation, not networking in the conventional sense. You watch who people defer to in unguarded moments. You notice who gets consulted before decisions are announced. You pay attention to who speaks last in rooms. Most 19-year-olds are trying to impress the wrong people. They are performing for audiences who cannot open any doors. Law 4. The debt you don't see. This one is uncomfortable. Machiavelli was ruthless about naming it, so we will be too. By the time you are 19, you are carrying financial chains you didn't choose and probably haven't identified yet. Not credit card debt. Heavier than that. Social debt. Family expectation. The weight of a hometown that needs you to either succeed in a specific visible way or come back and stay small. Friends who have unconsciously decided what kind of person you are and will quietly resist any version of you that threatens that decision. These are not bad people. That is not the point. The point is that Machiavelli understood and wrote explicitly that a man cannot execute a real strategy while simultaneously managing the emotional discomfort of everyone around him. At some point, those two things are in direct conflict, and most young men, when forced to choose comfort. They choose to stay legible to the people who knew them at 16, and they spend the next decade wondering why they haven't moved. What makes this particularly dangerous is how invisible it operates. Nobody tells you that you can't leave. Nobody explicitly forbids you from becoming something different. The mechanism is subtler. It works through small comments, through the social cost of being the one who thinks differently, through the exhausting requirement to justify yourself every time you make a choice that doesn't match the expected script. That cumulative friction doesn't feel like a chain. It feels like noise. But it produces the same result. You stay in range. You do not have to destroy those relationships, but you have to see them clearly for what they are. Every expectation placed on you by someone else is a small tax on your future. Name them. Then decide which ones you're paying willingly and which ones you're paying by default. Law 5. The one skill that compounds, not coding, not sales, not public speaking. Those are tools. This is something older. The ability to read what people actually want versus what they say they want. Every powerful person in history, every general, every merchant, every political operator Machiavelli ever studied had this in common. They could sit across from someone and within minutes understand the gap between the stated need and the real one. The client who says he wants a cheaper price actually wants to feel respected in the negotiation. The boss who says he wants better reports actually wants to feel like he's in control of information. The investor who says he wants returns actually wants to feel like he made a smart bet. This skill is learnable. It requires nothing but sustained, patient attention to human behavior in real situations. And the reason it compounds is that every year you practice it, you become exponentially harder to manipulate and exponentially better at creating value for the specific people who can actually help you. Machiavelli called this reading men. He considered it the foundational competence. Everything else, strategy, negotiation, alliance building, sits on top of it. Without it, all the other skills are being applied blind. The practical starting point is this. In every conversation you have from this point forward, hold one question in the back of your mind that you never ask out loud. What does this person actually need from this interaction that they're not directly stating? Practice generating an answer. You will be wrong often at first. Over time, you will be wrong less. The accumulation of that accuracy is the skill. It cannot be learned from a book. It is only built through real observation in real situations with real stakes. Start this week, not theoretically, in every real conversation you have. Law 6. Poverty as intelligence. Having nothing forces a quality of attention that comfortable men never develop. This is not romanticizing being broke. Being broke is not a virtue, but there is a specific sharpness that comes from operating with no margin for error, a heightened reading of rooms, people, and opportunities that men with safety nets never quite acquire. Machiavelli observed this repeatedly. He watched men from modest origins outmaneuver men of inherited wealth and connection, not because they worked harder, though sometimes they did, but because they watched more carefully. They couldn't afford to misread a situation, so they didn't. A man with resources can absorb a bad read. He makes a wrong call, and the cushion absorbs the impact. You don't have that cushion, which means every interaction, every room you enter, every decision you make carries real weight. That weight produces focus. Most people spend their entire lives trying to buy their way out of that pressure. What they don't realize is that the pressure was the only thing keeping them genuinely sharp. The risk at 19 is that you treat this sharpness as a temporary embarrassment to get past as quickly as possible rather than as a genuine advantage to develop consciously. You are seeing the world from the ground right now. That view is not inferior. In many ways, it is more accurate than any other vantage point you will ever have access to again. Law 7. The first alliance. Machiavelli was unambiguous about this. No prince, no matter how capable, no matter how intelligent, built lasting power alone. Every significant acquisition of territory, resources, or influence in history ran through a critical early alliance. One person who had already built something, who saw potential in you before it was obvious to anyone else, and who opened a door that would have taken you a decade to find on your own. This person exists in whatever world you are trying to enter. They are not hiding, but they are not accessible to everyone. They are accessible to the person who approaches them correctly. Correctly does not mean desperately. Correct approach means you have done enough work on your terrain reading that you understand what this person actually values. You arrive with genuine usefulness, not just enthusiasm. You ask questions that demonstrate you have already thought seriously about their world. You make it easy for them to say yes to a small first interaction rather than demanding a large commitment immediately. And here is the part nobody says clearly. The reason most young men never find this person is not that they don't try. It is that they go looking for a mentor when what they should be going looking for is a problem. Powerful people are not short on admirers. They are short on people who can solve specific, real problems without needing their hand held through the process. Show up as the solution to something real and specific in their world, and the relationship builds itself. Show up as an enthusiastic student asking for guidance, and you become a task on someone's list. Most young men either never seek this person out at all, or they approach them badly, too needy, too vague, asking for things they haven't yet earned the right to ask for. The rare 19-year-old who gets this right compresses a decade of solo effort into 2 or 3 years. Law 8. What to never reveal at 19. 3 things: your ambition, your resentment, your actual plan. Machiavelli considered premature disclosure one of the most reliable ways young men destroy their own futures before they begin. Not because ambition is shameful, because the moment you reveal what you're actually building, every person in your environment begins, unconsciously, without malice, to relate to you through that lens, and most of them will find reasons it won't work. Not because they want you to fail, because your ambition makes them quietly uncomfortable about their own choices, and they will discharge that discomfort as skepticism directed at you. Keep your ambition internal until it has produced something external. Let results speak first. There is a version of this you've probably seen play out already. The person who announces the business, the plan, the move they're about to make, receives a round of social validation for the announcement, and then never actually executes because the validation satisfied the same need the execution would have. The announcement became a substitute for the action. Machiavelli would have recognized this immediately. He watched it happen in the courts of Florence constantly. Men who performed ambition instead of executing it. Your resentment is still more dangerous. Every 19-year-old with nothing has legitimate grievances about the hand they were dealt. That resentment is real and in many cases completely justified. But the moment it becomes visible, you are marked, not as someone wronged, as someone reactive. And reactive men are predictable. Predictable men are controllable. Hold it. Process it privately. Convert it into fuel that only shows up in the quality of your work. Law 9. The long game installed early. This is the one that separates the rare 19-year-old from everyone else his age. Most young men are playing a game with a 1 to 3 year time horizon. They want results they can feel and show by 21, 22 at the latest. That time pressure causes them to make decisions optimized for the short window. Visible wins, quick money, things that signal success to people around them right now. Machiavelli watched Cosimo de' Medici plant seeds in his 20s that didn't bear fruit until his 40s. Alliances built quietly. Knowledge accumulated without immediate application. Positions taken that seemed minor at the time and became critical decades later. He wasn't playing the game everyone else was playing. He was playing a different game on a longer board. Here is what a long game actually looks like in practical terms at 19. It means learning something deeply that won't be immediately monetizable, but will become rare and valuable in 7 to 10 years. It means building a relationship with someone 20 years older than you with no immediate expectation of return. It means making a geographic or professional move that looks sideways or even backwards to people watching from the outside, but positions you for something they can't see yet because they're not playing far enough ahead to see it. Every year from 19, the cost of playing a long game goes up. Obligations accumulate. Dependencies form. Other people begin to need specific things from you, and those needs pull your decisions toward the short term, whether you want them to or not. Right now, the cost of patience is still low. That is the most valuable asset on your personal balance sheet right now. The 19-year-old who understands this and protects it is playing a game almost nobody around him is playing. That gap between your time horizon and everyone else's is where real separation happens. Not through talent, not through luck. Through the compounding of decisions made by someone who isn't in a rush because he genuinely understands that the right move at the right time is worth more than 100 frantic moves made out of fear. Here is what Machiavelli never published. He wrote The Prince. He wrote the Discourses. He wrote extensively about power, about republics, about military strategy. But there are letters, private correspondence from the last years of his life, where he hinted at something he considered too specific, too dangerous to commit to paper in any organized form. About how young men of low birth actually climbed in Florence. The real mechanism, not the public version. Historians have debated what he meant. Some think it was about information, the specific kind that powerful men never realize they're leaking. Others think it was about timing, a precise understanding of when systems are vulnerable to entry that most people never develop because they're not watching closely enough. That question doesn't have a clean answer, but the fact that he chose not to write it down tells you something. Some knowledge is only transmitted between people who have already demonstrated they're serious enough to use it correctly. You just spent time with the version he did choose to make public. What you do with it is the only thing that matters now. Most people your age are waiting to feel ready. You just spent this time learning why that wait is the mechanism that keeps most men exactly where they are. That distinction between the men who understand this and the men who never will is the only one that has ever actually mattered.